Kimberly. That was just a break, and now we're going to, let's go to shock. The best way I can describe on shock, there are three ways we ever end up being in shock, and it's low hypovolemia, low volume. You lost a lot. And the second way is the heart just isn't beating and pumping that fluid correctly to the right areas. And the third way you can be in shock is that fluid is escaping out of the system into tissue. It may be, the first way is the volume is less because it's going on pavement. That third way is it's less because it's not coming back out of the tissue back, maybe because of the third way the heart is not doing it. In a lot of ways, the symptoms are similar in all three because blood is not getting oxygen and nutrients to the areas that it needs to. Either they're on the blood's on the concrete, the blood's in the tissue, or the pump just can't do it. Hypovolemia is the most common shock, and I want you to imagine an inner tube, and if an inner tube gets a hole, for us to keep the integrity of the inner tube, we've got to get a pump on that fast. And so it's the same thing with shock. There is a disruption in that wonderful cyclic system we've got. Something has disrupted it. Either a gunshot wound and blood's all over the pavement, or a wreck or something, but hypovolemia, blood is out of our regular cyclic system. And so if we want to keep blood going to the little finger as well as the big heart, we got to pump harder. So it's already right there. Your first symptom of shock is tachycardia or rapid heartbeat. And if you had a tire, you would be pumping it like fury. Now, with that break in our cyclic system, where to go next? So the system, what happens in the system is that if the pressure is trying to go down, it's another symptom. You've got a puncture, you've got a break, so the pressure's going down, and we don't want it to. It can't. We've got to get blood to everywhere, and so the blood pressure can't go down. But we've got the sympathetic nervous system that is governed. We've got those sensors at the base of our brain that can tell immediately when our blood pressure is dropping, and when it does, it sends a message to the lungs. You get busy and get as much oxygen in this person as you can get in them. And so the sympathetic nervous, or the low blood pressure, they say here's where the blood pressure is so significant, because those chemoreceptors recognize that immediately and tell the lungs, start breathing faster, take in more oxygen. So your tachypneic, your breathing has increased. And then the GI system, we don't need to get busy with that. The GI system does slow down, and this is all connected with the sympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight. The sympathetic nervous system, when it recognized that drop in blood pressure, the sympathetic nervous system, as we've called flight and fight, squeezed down and squeezed to try to push fluid out that we don't need out here, blood that is making us pink. The sympathetic nervous system says, don't need for your skin to be pink, I need your heart beating with more oxygen. So it clamps down, sympathetic nervous system, when that blood pressure dropped and signaled it, it's clamped down, and they say it can push 3 liters to the center of your body. And that's why you're pale, why you're pallor, because it has constricted these superficial veins to use all that blood to get to the organs that need it. And I just think it's fascinating because when it clamped down, any moisture on our skin came up, and that's why you're clammy. It's because, so there's another symptom, you're clammy. And you're clammy because of the constriction, that blood went down and moisture came up on our skin. Well, if it's hypovolemia, then the volume's down, and with that low volume, the blood is going to the kidneys, and it's going to be filtered, but we don't have that rush of blood that was so great because we got a issue with a hole or something. And so the clamping down is a wonderful thing, but when it did that, it broke some red cells when it did it. And now we've got blood that's not only a little sluggish, but it's full of fragmented red cells that have been broken. And of course they're all going to travel eventually, all the fluid travels to the kidneys, and we have our wonderful filter system there, but it's a filter, and so the fragments cover the filter, and our urine's going to be red, so hematuria. And isn't it amazing what the body does? The trouble, biggest trouble, I don't mind red urine, except it's going to clog my filter. And more, if this shock doesn't get rectified, then I'm going to completely block the nephron, and I'm going to have urinary shutdown, renal shutdown, if I can't get any urine through my filters. Then, let me see. The interesting thing, I think, is the brain is so clear, and it is one of the last to go, and you think, well, because we've shunted, and the blood, and you know, the brain does need blood, and needs good blood with sugar in it, or the neurons die, and the body does a great deal of shunning to the brain as well as the heart. And if you've ever been around shocked patients, they are so clear and talk to you like normal. And the other night at work, there was a gunshot wound out 2 in the morning in front of the women's. I mean, he came and screeched, did I tell you? Screeched his brakes and got out. Some man was out smoking, and he said, buddy, are you okay? He said, no, I've been shot. I need some help. And he fell right then, the fella did. And laid in this pool. I went out to him because they called me, and emergency went out to him, the emergency room, but it's OB. emergency.
Poor guy.
I know it. And he's bleeding pretty profusely, clear as a bell. Has his cell phone and his keys in his hand laying there. Anyway, it is amazing how clear they are, and their memory's good. If you talk to them 3 days later, they remember things.
Is he okay?
We don't know, because Metro, we put a tourniquet on. They wouldn't let. It's a kind of a bit an issue, because I'm the supervisor of the hospital. Rapid response comes to anything, and I appreciate them. I love the rapid response people. But you kind of acquiesce to a rapid response. So the OB nurses and I threw a sheet down. I said, let's get him rolled on this sheet and pick it. You know, you can pick P. He's a big man. I said, we can pick him up and get him on a gurney, get him in there and start an IV. That's what we're doing. Rapid response. Stop it. Don't touch him. Well, we backed off. He said, I want Metro here. And he was treating it like a car accident, I thought, because he didn't want us to touch him. Well, we'd already put the tourniquet on him. And he's, you know, he's good. But he's for the whole campus, this fella. So he's not particularly our person. But, I mean, he is. Well, we kept waiting. Now Metro's with us. Security's here. We're watching him. We're staring. And finally, I went over to the OB nurse. I said, we're getting him into your department. And we just leveled down and we're going to get him, and Metro arrived. And they said, we're going to take him to Vanderbilt because it's a trauma center. So they did, and I don't know what happened to him. I always, when you work in an emergency room, you always want to know, but didn't. So it is interesting that is the last to go, and so, you know. Now, the heart, we've already talked then. They're getting acidotic, and it's so they're building up H ions, and they're breathing them off. You know, the body's trying to keep them out of respiratory acidosis. That, remember, the lungs are going to do it as long as they can, and they're blowing off. But there is that possibility of acidosis. Now, I'm still on just hypovolemia, and so I want you to keep in mind, biggest thing is some fluid. I think I'm not sure if I told you. When we say 5 liters or 5 quarts of blood, they say we can lose 1 quart or 2 units. And a unit's what we give in the hospital. They say we can live 2 units without dying. Usually it's more than that, your life is in danger. And so we need to get fluid in him. And if he's lost a liter of blood, he needs probably blood. Remember, for a little while, the hematocrit and hemoglobin are going to look good, even though you've lost blood. And you are hypovolemic, but that proportion. Now, once you start having IV fluid, it's not going to be, you're going to get to see a different story, because it's going to be diluted. Let me see. Preferably, the IV of choice would be sodium chloride or D5 something, D5 lactated ringers, because they're so loaded with stuff, sugar, salt, and that will make our volume more full, replaced. So I'm trying to think of anything else on hypovolemia. And when I get through, we'll see if I covered everything, Melissa. Now, that's hypovolemia, cardiogenic, the symptoms are going to be the same. Instead of losing blood on the concrete, you're losing it out there in tissue because the pump can't get it back, and it's just staying out there. And so your symptoms are pretty much the same. They don't come on fast. They, and your hematocrit and hemoglobin stay pretty decent because you're taking a sample of whole blood for that test. Let me see if there was anything. I think that's what I want to say on that. Now, there's really a third, and when you read about shock, it's pretty universal, hypovolemia and cardiac shock. The third is an umbrella. How many did I give on the video?
3.
Yeah, okay, good. Because they threw in for several years obstructive, and nobody could figure out what was any different than that and any of the others. So they have dropped it. I've heard, and now, did I use the word circulatory shock? Okay. This circulatory shock has 3 under it, and they are, and it goes by a different name. That's the newest name, circulatory shock. But I'm just going to tell you there's another name called Vasogenic shock. It's the same. And distributive shock. So distributive and vasogenic are the same thing, or circulatory, all 3 names. And they have these 3 under them because there is some similarity about these 3 shocks. They're not exactly like the hypovolemic and cardiac. The 3 under there are septic shock, and that just simply means your blood is loaded with bacteria. And that makes sense. You're in shock because your organs aren't getting oxygen because the blood's so loaded down with germs. So the same problem's happening. You're in shock. You're not getting fed oxygen and nutrients, but it's because it's so crowded out with germs. You can guess what happens. You're given fluids and antibiotics. Of course, cultures would be done, and I'm simplifying it so, but because it's not simplified, but that's septic. And I'm going to tell you some differences in the symptoms in just a minute. The third one is neurogenic, and it's, if you'll think of Christopher Reeve, Superman, his was a neurogenic shock. His spinal cord was injured, and then that throws the body homeostasis. It throws the sympathetic system. The central nervous system is thrown. Drugs can do it. Neurogenic starts with the nervous system. So drugs can do it. Accidents can do it. Anesthesia. Insulin. Central nervous system depressants can do it. Anything that throws our neurosystem. And then the third is anaphylactic shock, anaphylaxis. And that one's probably the most peculiar because it's just like DIC. All of a sudden one day you're allergic to something, you're anaphylactic. And for what reason? And it's the craziest thing. All of a sudden you're allergic. Just the biggest thing to remember with anaphylaxis is the EpiPen, usually in 0.5, for children 0.3. and its strength is 1 to 1,000, the strength of the epi. And you just take the cap off and jab them and give it. Allergy shots to friends and relatives, you need to think about it. And I like to be accommodating. And if somebody's been on their allergy medicine for a while, I don't ever mind helping out. Give an allergy shot. You know, the rule is make them stay with you 20 minutes and make sure they're all right, but know how to work the EpiPen or whatever they have with you. And usually if you want to help somebody with their allergy shots, they have the EpiPen. But just make sure they bring it with them always and that you know what you're going to do. Some people just absolutely will not, nurses will not give their friends and relatives an allergy shot. And that's certainly got to be their decision. But to me, if you've got the EpiPen, got a bottle of Benadryl beside you or something, you ought to be able to do it, but that's got to be a personal decision. It's just such, anaphylaxis is just, why all of a sudden you've been around poison ivy all your life and then one day you have a reaction. It's just, it's a crazy thing, just like ITP and DIC. The body just sometimes just gets a little bit kinked and goes off in a crazy direction. In nursing school, I had a classmate who, she just got swollen, just swelled up. She felt good, she sounded good, she didn't look good, but other than that, she was so swollen, she just had slits for her eyes. But, I mean, she felt good, so she came to class, she came to clinical, and was loaded up on Benadryl to try to get it down. Susan McLeod. And so she, you know, we all said, what in the, she said, I don't know. Well, you knew it was systemic because it was all over. It wasn't her laundry soap because it wasn't around her waist where the belt was or whatever. So you knew it had to be systemic. She said the doctor and I have been thinking and thinking. She was in clinical that particular morning with her slitted eyes, and she said, she said, I'm going to the doctor this afternoon. We're going to try to put our heads together again. She felt fine. So her reaction is an allergy, but boy, if she ever took whatever, she would be dead as much as it did to her, and still on Benadryl and all. Well, the next day she was fine, looked good. She said the doctor and I are just working our heads together, what in the world? And she said, finally the doctor said, you're sure you have not pricked yourself with a needle or anything? She remembered drawing up penicillin and did a prick. Of course, that was no thought. She didn't give herself any, she just pricked. But it's enough on it that it did that to her. Needless to say, she wears a bracelet to this day that says she's allergic. Taken penicillin all her life, and then that did that. So it's just a crazy thing. Now, back to the symptoms. I mean, of course, I told you what we know what to do with anaphylaxis. We know what to do with septic. Neurogenic is we've just got to take care of them, or they're going to die. They've got to get some breathing going, help. So it's just palliative for the neurogenic. Now, let me see, wait a minute, something else I wanted to, oh, this is the one that, this umbrella group, I told you the other name was vasogenic or distributive or circulatory. It's the shock that they're flushed. And they're flushed because the blood is outside, it's in the tissue. It's not getting back. It's in the tissue, so you're very flushed, you're very red, as opposed to our other two where you're paler. And also, now follow this, the pulse pressure. You all know pulse pressure. I'll tell you if you can't remember. Pulse pressure is the difference in the systolic and the diastolic, that pressure. You and I want about 40. We say 120 to 80 is just really good. So that's 40 is the pulse pressure. If you, okay, I'm going to say everything all at once and it's hard not to. When you take a blood pressure, and I think we've been over this before, when you take a blood pressure with a sphygmo, you blow the bulb up. Your first sound is blood hitting the vessel. That's your first sound. When it's filled the vessel is your last sound. You're not going to hear another sound. That was your hitting the vessel and the last filling the vessel. So if I'm hypovolemic, my pulse pressure is going to be very small. And to give you an example, it's going to be 70 over 50 maybe. Because my first sound was fine, it was 70. But that meant it didn't take long for that last fluid, because I don't have much fluid. So it wasn't 40, it was 20. So a smaller pulse pressure with the hypo and the cardiogenic. With vasogenic, where you're paler, the pulse pressure is wide, because I've got a lot of fluid. I've got a lot of fluid in me, in the vascular system. So the first sound is the first hit on the side of the vessel. But I got so much blood, it's a long time before the last one. So a wide pulse pressure is a symptom of a vasogenic shock. It's not diagnostic, but you can be, don't be surprised if on one of these shocks that pulse pressure's so wide, it's 60 or whatever. Shock, it goes in stages, and the stages are, first, the body compensates, and that's what we talked about when I was giving you the first symptoms. When they've got a puncture, the pump builds up to keep us going, the heart rate is busy, the blood pressure goes down, but we immediately hit the sympathetic nervous system to get it up. Those are compensatory things. They compensate for that. And so that's the stage when the body is in compensation and nothing drastic is showing too much. Now, if it's continuing, we hadn't been able to get to them, we're in the woods or something, and the shock is continuing, it's called progressive, and that makes sense. And it's usually in that stage that medical help is joining us. So at first, there's the compensatory, then the progressive, and then the third stage is not the good stage. Anytime you hear the word refractory, it's not a good word. It usually means bad. And in this case, it's refractory usually means irreversible. If a condition is refractory, it's probably not going to be reversed. So those are those stages. Now, did I cover it, Melissa, pretty good? Yeah, it's just a 30-minute thing, isn't it? Now, I think that's what I want to say on shock and hematology. Let me just mention hepatitis, because it doesn't take long. hepatitis is a virus, you know, and I think, and they're primarily for the most part, we transmit it by blood, semen. Is that the main? I think it is, blood and semen. But there is an exception. Hepatitis A, to distinguish it from all the others, and there are a bunch of others, but A is a little different because they call it infectious, and it's a good word because it kind of keeps it from being serum or body fluids. It's infectious, and it is contaminated feces that enter the mouth. Either you licked your finger and you shouldn't have, or you touched some money that had the virus on it and then you licked your finger. But whatever, infectious is feces going in the mouth. You ate at a kitchen. You ate at a restaurant that had the kitchen.
So paranoid now.
They run. You know, we are so trusting,
I work
aren't
in
we?
retail, so I'm holding money all the time.
My dad, and I use mine to say, he ate at a restaurant in St. Louis and he got hepatitis A. He said when he was eating the shrimp, he said it tasted bad, but he ate it anyway. He had hepatitis A. He turned yellow.
Who, a friend or your
My
husband?
daddy.
Oh, your dad.
I
And
remember
that's
my
what,
little girl was just she was little, and I remember I called the pediatrician, and he said, well, if she's been exposed around him, I want her to have, and I was like, well, I mean, we just visited, like, she didn't touch him or anything. They were gonna, yeah.
I'm telling you, people don't understand, and I want you all to get gluten clear so you're not foolish, because so many people are foolish about it. Only way to get it is in and out unless she's eating. And it's the only way she can get it that way. And contaminated water. Oh, you can get it lots of ways, but that's the only way it's going to get in you. And so now all the others, and I was looking in because it always amazes me how many other hepatitises there are. And it starts with B, C, D, E, I think F, and that may, yeah, here's A, B, C, D, E, and I think there's an F. But they're all viral, and they're all serum. You get it by, you know, like I said, through blood primarily, or semen. And I know a friend whose daughter, actually she may be about dead, but she's a drug user, and my friend, this was several years ago, but leaving class last Sunday, she said she was here, said she's on hospice now with cancer or dying or something. But she's always been off the beaten path, the daughter has. And one day, this was 20 years ago, I bet, this nurse said to me, I've been up all night. She was in the emergency room, hepatitis, and we were there all night, got her home, because she doesn't live at home, but she said, I brought her home, and it's hepatitis, and they told me to burn the sheets and all the utensils and everything. She said, is that right? I said, no, you know that she is serum hepatitis. You know she's a drug user. It's serum. So she doesn't need, it's not her mouth, and so unless they're going to exchange blood or semen, There's nothing. So she said, I called the hotline and asked because it didn't seem right. And I said, do I need to destroy everything when she eats and just let her use plastic? They said, that'll be fine. Now, when people give you those kind of answers, they don't know what they're talking about when they say, that'll be fine. Because you don't go wrong to say that'll be fine, to overdo it. And just remember, then, A is a little different, but all those others have to do with blood and serum. And so it's just so exciting to me that we do now have, because not until how many years? I want to say just about 5 years or less, maybe 3, that we have a drug for hepatitis. And up until 3 to 5 years ago, we didn't have anything other than rest the liver. And that meant, this word, I try my best. It's cauliflower and broccoli, but they're called C-U-R-I, what?
Curvaceous? Or
It's C.
I know what
What word is that? And I have such trouble.
F-I-C-I-O-U-S.
Cruciferous. Cruciferous, I believe is the word. But it's broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. That family.
Is it cuniferous?
Cruciferous.
You're going to have to look it up.
It's C-R-U-I-F-E.
Right.
Cruciferous.
Yeah.
Cruciferous. Cruciferous. Why is that word so hard? Cruciferous. They say those foods do rest the liver. So until then, I always told people, tell people to eat those foods. And then I read, and I told somebody who was yellow as could be, Melissa, the scleral were yellow. Went to the doctor, and they couldn't do anything. And I told him I had read milk thistle, because milk thistle is great for the liver. And I said, I read that milk thistle is great for the liver, and so this is a problem with your liver. So he did, and he just did great. Went to the doctor. The doctor used him as a poster child, took him all over everywhere. Do you look at what he looked on? I said, did you tell him milk thistle? No, I forgot to tell him. And because it apparently is good for the liver. It's good whether you've got hepatitis or not. Milk thistle's good. Just our liver takes quite a beating, and so anything you can do to help it is good.
I'm sorry, what is milk thistle?
It's a weed, isn't it? A weed. It's like thistle.
Drink it as a
Butterflies like
Or you can
thistle.
just,
Oh, okay.
Kroger's,
It's a
you
supplement.
just get the tablets of Kroger's.
Okay.
Supplement, thank you. Now, did we already go over the drugs that are great for that? See, I don't give it, but it's Humira. Humira. Then they've got another 1 or 2 new ones out. Humira. And you take them 12 weeks, like $90,000, I read it. But you take it, but you're through. You are over hepatitis.
Is this hepatitis for all the hepatitis?
Not Humira. No, that's
But it's. I've got
It's
it here.
been a commercial on
Why don't
forever
y'all
for it.
help me here? Yeah, but I know what. Let me see. Oh, Harvona.
Harvona.
Harvoni. It takes 12 weeks. $80,000 to $90,000. But there's some more. That was the first one I think that came out.
Commercials for that now.
That one or others?
That one.
Yeah.
That's why
It's
I
the
thought of
oldest,
Humira.
I think,
Yeah.
out there. Isn't it wonderful? We've got a drug to do it now. I mean, because it was, How'd your daddy do with it,
He was
Melissa?
fine. I mean, it took a few weeks, but he recovered fine.
Uh-huh. And, yeah. Now, are high school kids getting vaccinated for hepatitis
Yeah.
B, C?
It's the one with 3 shots. I can't remember.
Okay.
I
B.
think so, yeah.
High school kids are?
Uh-huh.
My kids have gotten it.
Mhm. Some, maybe not all schools.
My daughter's
my
got her
pediatrician.
second
Yeah.
one and she's 15.
Yeah.
Our school's not requiring it,
Started
are
in
they?
middle school.
I don't think they require it.
Uh-uh.
College require, well, nursing school requires it.
Yeah.
for me.
And I think it's in sports, and they're scared you're gonna mix blood with each other. Or, I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah. Did yours have to do it?
They didn't have to get Hep B again, I don't think. I'm trying to remember. I feel like it might have been 7th grade.
Oh, really?
See, my daughter's 15 and just got for some reason, I think at this last visit, now she just has to go back and get the third one
Oh my.
at another point. It's the same series, but she
Yeah.
just, she went earlier in the summer and got one, and then she's got the second
Yeah.
one, and now she has to just get the third one. She's 15.
One other thing, now this is jumping around, but when Linda told us about RN.com, she also said kind of what you did on YouTube's. She said you can find anything on RN.com. Yeah, she said it's really a wealth of information. I think that's all I'm going to say on hepatitis. Let me talk a minute on cancer, and that's all I'm going to talk is a minute. We've already talked about the blood markers. You remember them, the labs, the blood markers, CA120. We already talked about those. They show up as markers in your bloodstream if possibly you might have that propensity.
Well,
Or-
they don't do a lot of, they act like that's not really.
No, it's just not reliable.
Yeah.
That's what they say, so I don't know why they even do them, but they do. I guess to verify, they suspect you have this cancer, so we'll do a marker, and when it's high, we know it is. But yeah, they're not that reliable. But we have them. Now, just to keep in mind on cancer, if anybody had to say one word, and I may have gone over this, it's irritation. It's a constant irritation that causes cancer. That's real easy to say. In what way? Well, who was it? Oh, Babe Ruth, cancer of the mouth. He kept us an irritation. I don't think it had to be tobacco, but he kept a tobacco, cigar or something, Babe Ruth, and he gets cancer there. And I tell it every time. I feel like I've told you. My husband had a girlfriend. He said Toogie, when he was little boy, and she had a jawbreaker. She'd keep a jawbreaker in her mouth all the time. Got cancer of that jaw. That irritation. And what it is, the body just gives up. I mean, it wears out replacing you, and it's doing it so fast that finally in that replacement, something gets, our DNA is a code. And when we keep messing with the code, it gets haywire and gets off. And if it gets off a little bit, we've got atypical cells, and that's cancer. So if I had to say anything, it'd be that. Now, they say stress can cause cancer. Well, stress is doing things to our body. Stress does things to cells. And can the cells keep up with that reproduction code? It's got a code it's got to follow. And I think I told you that, no I did, the columnar cells, or the lung cells, are columnar because columns have more surface than a round. And so lung cells are columnar. But if you are a painter, and unfortunately that's your occupation, and you've breathed those chemicals for 40 years, they have gone in there and those cells have been fighting that abuse. And then one day they just change and try to keep fighting, but they become tougher. And a lot of times they change to squamous, just to make them tough. And so that squamous then becomes squamous cell carcinoma. And or tobacco, that you can live forever and be a smoker, but for whatever reason, your body can't handle that constant abuse of the chemicals into those cells.
That's the first time it's ever met. My husband has chronic pancreatitis. He was an alcoholic, used drugs, but he didn't know he had a birth defect. It was a papillary divisum in his pancreas. So it sprouts two different directions, and one side gets clogged. So he's had like 3 stents, and they said that ends usually in pancreatic cancer. He wouldn't have known it without the drug and alcohol abuse. He probably would have known until like 70 or 80 years old.
Yeah.
But because of the damage to liver and all that stuff, it just accelerated it. But it never made sense to me. I'm like, why does it? What you're saying though, if it's that constant irritation to the pancreas.
It really is, exactly. Just constant irritation. Yeah. Oh, and so the cells in here in the lungs try to adapt to the abuse you're doing and so they change their code a little bit to toughen up and become squamous. And I think I mentioned to you that your cervical, a woman's cervical cells are, they're columnar, not for any particular reason, but they become squamous to handle more activity or abuse in the vaginal area. So they normally, and so they change to a different cell. That's in the code. And I think I told you, my GYN said that she was low one day and said, she said, I'm just kind of low. She said, I've just had so many 19-year-olds in here with atypical cells. Well, she didn't, because atypical cells in women are commonplace. But she said pre-cancer in women. And I said, well, what's the reason? She said, well, I think it's a lot of things. She said, I think it's multiple partners. And her point was, I told her, well, forget it. She said, I don't know what to do about it. I said, you can't do anything because in World War II, they showed syphilis movies galore, to hitting them, trying to get the men to not be so promiscuous. And the Vietnam War worse than ever. So it didn't, their training films didn't work. Showing the grossness of things works for 2 weeks, but not forever.
Papilloma, the papilloma virus.
Yeah, yeah.
It's big.
Yeah.
And you would not believe what can happen with that one.
Oh, really?
I watched. I think it was the Barbara Walters a long time ago, and I was shocked at how much that can cause damage.
The virus, the papilloma virus.
Well, that's why there's an injection now that you can give the kids.
Right. Yeah, my daughter's.
Do they
Shelly needs one more of those.
I don't know if they really.
But they're not vaccinating boys is the problem, and they carry it.
Oh, see, I didn't realize.
Well, I mean, they are, but most parents of boys don't think about, I need to go get them this HPV vaccine because.
I think it's getting better. I think they're, I don't know, mine's getting it, He's
Yeah.
15.
Well, nobody required it. The doctor wanted
It's something I think that you
The provider-
decide.
Right.
The provider offers the information.
I got you.
Yeah.
but-
Because some people are still very, with vaccines in general.
Yeah.
And that's a personal
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
But especially with this, because they're like, well, they're not saying my son or daughter's going out and have sex. Well, of course
You
they
don't
are.
know anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't know.
I mean, at some point
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah.
And you don't know if your partner hasn't been with anybody else. I mean, honestly, all they can say is yes or no, I haven't. But
Yeah.
again, it's the whole vaccine issue too, for or against. But I know we already started it, and she needs the
Well,
last
see, and
one.
I didn't realize they were that forward with it, the pediatricians.
Well, I think they started putting boys on the commercial or whatever
Oh,
too,
good.
because it.
Well,
That's good.
public health was really pushing this about 8 years ago or 10 years ago, and then it just kind of fizzled all of a sudden. And I think part of the reason was because, well, the drug companies were pushing it, first of all, and CDC got on the bandwagon and all that kind of stuff. And then it did start to fizzle because there was pushback about another immunization, and there was pushback because they were dealing out to women, and it was the guys that needed to take it too, and there was just all kinds of little issues with it. But the main thing I think was because at that time, I think the vaccine, now I don't know what it's like now, but was only for like maybe 2 strains of, there's several, strains of this type of virus that can cause that problems. And so, because, everybody was saying, well, there's like 15 million, viruses out there.
Uh-huh.
And they're gonna give you an immunization for one virus, so,
Yeah.
it just all fizzled out, but it's still like there, like spinning around with the drug
Well,
companies.
Well,
And
the commercial was awful too.
Yeah.
It like put the guilt.
Is
trip
it
on
off
the
now?
parents.
Is that commercial?
Yes,
You
the
know what?
commercial's
They've
kind of
changed.
gone. Yeah.
They've changed the commercial now, because back a long time ago, it was like the little kid going, well, didn't you know, Mom?
Didn't you know? And now I have
Didn't you
cancer.
know?
And you're like,
Oh, please.
Now they've
Terrible.
changed it. The kid doesn't say that anymore.
It
But
was drug companies.
Yeah.
That's
ridiculous.
Yeah.
The science
It was
behind
awful.
was not great. And so finally, we at the department, I was in the Department of Public Health in Kentucky, we just dropped the whole thing. We didn't do it.
Didn't they?
We didn't push it.
Yeah.
They banned it for a while in Europe. Is it still banned in Europe?
There's just a lot of reactions.
Yeah, there is.
For the
Yeah,
normal
it's
girls to start
There
getting
is a
it,
lot of reaction
and
about
there's
that.
a link to
But
kids who've had tick
The
bites
papilloma virus.
and other
is serious.
issues that the
And
shot
it's
may
very
or some sort of
proliferate. I mean, it's
interaction.
everywhere.
Or if you have
So many
autoimmune
people
issues,
have it.
things like that, so we were advised, my daughter has those issues, so she will not have that shot.
Very shaky.
Yeah,
I think it's still banned in Europe.
I worked in the doctor's office 6 years ago, and she had just started getting it because like she had parents of like middle school age girls asking about it, so she ordered it and started giving it after she researched it out herself. But it's
Well, and my OB or GYN said that she said, well, tobacco and promiscuity, those 2 things, those cells at the cervix are normally beginning to change. You introduce some foreignness, i.e. various semens and tobacco, and it may interfere with the change, is what she's saying. Because it's a normal change cervically. And then you add birth control pills on top, it could be, I don't know, the whole thing. But just to keep in mind that cancer is a change of the code, and when it changes, so often it goes off crazy. Quadruples in duplicity and in that loses its code and what it's supposed to be doing. But I do want to just reiterate that atypical cells at the cervix it's in the middle of a change. As I think I may have told you, a physician said it's no different than your nose. It's your nose. It's filtering. And so it's got a lot of, it's connected to the outside just like your nose is. And so you're going to get cells that may not be always compatible. And so if you get too much change, that it interferes with the change of the cells. All right. Next week will be demonstration, and if I have time, then I'll start. I think I'm going to start nutrition. Diabetes, because I hadn't done diabetes yet. And I believe you two are you and who?
I'm saying.
I knew somebody because you're sitting.
Now, musical chairs in here.
And so and if you be thinking if you want in October to come to clinical, the course was over, but you can still come to clinical if you want to. And we'll talk about it closer to that time. All right, next time.
I mean, like there isn't enough longula.
Right, if your daughter gets yeah. That's terrible.
And the virus, the shot is in, it's over.
Yeah.